Recognizes Mr. Shaheen.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no more questions, I close.
Wait. Does the gentleman yield?
Vote.
Ms. Gonzalez, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Absolutely.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Mr. Sheed, I know you mentioned generally your reason behind filing this bill, but are there concrete examples here in Texas that this issue has arise that you find it necessary to codify this language into the code?
Like I said, there's instances throughout the United States as well as Texas, and then I've also expressed concern by actions taken by legislatures, and I called out both California and Colorado.
But you know, and I'm not a family lawyer. I mean, I'm a civil lawyer, but I don't specifically do family law. But my understanding is usually when you look at the code, the way that it currently lays out what abuse is, right? The actions, it's as actions or omissions, failure to what have you, right? These are very blatant kind of just, failure to, right? I mean, just not taking care of your child, right? Things that we think of that are just very harmful, right? And, your addition to it to me, it doesn't really jive well in there because, those are just kind of very egregious, actions on part of, whoever has custody or control over the child. And, in a family court situation, when they're investigating these types of allegations of child abuse or neglect, typically the way that they, look at the circumstances or the situation, it's what is in the best interest of the child. That's what a judge, when the judge is hearing a case, or when it's in front of a jury, it is what is in the best interest of that child. And forcing a child to not let them be their authentic self, or forcing them to be something otherwise, has very detrimental impact on a child's mental state, and sometimes could lead to them physically hurting themselves. And so a court, that's why a court sometimes has to intervene, or a jury has to intervene to make sure that it's in the child's best interest, to be in that home or to be removed from that home. And so, do you not think that that's the job of that it should not be in the best interest of the child? That they should just be forced to not be themselves.
All that the bill does is it just allows for a disagreement between the parents and the child, and that the parents don't lose custody of the child if there's a disagreement.
Okay, so this is regarding when somebody's has had a divorce, or they're separated, and one parent is accepting their child, right? And is trying to be understanding of their child, because hey, being a child is as hard as in and of itself, right? When you're trying to figure yourself out. And so parent A is a loving parent, an accepting parent, and trying to help their kid figure themselves out. And the other parent just refuses to listen to their child and tells them that they have to be a certain way. So is that the situation that you're referring to?
What this does is it just defines the definition of abuse and neglect, so that there's a disagreement between the parents and the child, that they don't lose custody of the child. Because there's lots of disagreements that occur between parent and their children.
But I think in those situations when this arises, again, I go back to that determination is made and what is in the best interest of the child.
That's correct.
I mean, so then why not include language in there too? Because I remember watching your layout in committee that you were saying parental rights, parental rights, parental rights. Well, and you did say as well that, hey, if a parent wants to affirm their child, they want to accept their child because they're loving parents, they should be able to too, right? And so why not include language in there too that says it is also not child abuse for a parent to affirm their child's gender or sexual orientation or gender identity? Because if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. And if we're talking about parental rights, then hey,
again, you're changing the objective of the bill if you do that. But secondly, you've got definitions of abuse and neglect that detail or address other issues that might arise that are true cases of abuse or neglect.
But how is that changing and I forget what you just said, because you even
Because
said it
the
in
objective
committee.
of the bill is to ensure that a parent doesn't lose custody over their child if they disagree with the child's view of their gender.
And also the same thing. What if, in the same situation that you're referring to, so then what if you want to, because this was, the rhetoric that we were hearing, last year when DPS was coming to parents' homes, parents who had transgender children, and now these parents have had to flee because DPS was investigating them just because they had transgender kids, accusing them of being abusive for affirming their child.
Do you have a question?
No, I'm just saying, is this what this bill is for? Because we've seen that. And so you're saying that if a parent does affirm their child, then
They don't lose custody of their child if there's a
No,
disagreement
but I'm saying
of
so-
the
but-
child's gender identity.
but if you're saying, when your layout, you said it was about parental rights. And so,
Yeah, you have
again,
the
why doesn't a
parental
parent
rights
also
have a
have the
right to
right?
disagree
So why
with their
doesn't a parent
child.
also have the right to affirm their child or love their child?
As I said, the objective of the bill
So-
is to protect a mom and or dad if there's a disagreement of the child's gender identity. That's the objective of the legislation.
So you want to codify into law that a parent can force their child to have to force them to not be themselves and not allow them to be their authentic self, to a point that can cause a lot of mental damage. That can cause a lot of children, when children
I
aren't
think there's
allowed.
provisions in
when
law
children
that
aren't
talk
allowed.
about mental abuse. That's already covered.
If children aren't allowed and they're being forced, and those are cases that I have actually seen where a parent tries to, when the same situation that you're referring to, and I'm sure that I probably know what case you're talking about, where one parent was a loving parent, affirming, and the other parent would force their child to wear boys' clothes when this child identified as a girl, and refused to call this child by their chosen name, and that caused a lot of damage to this kid, and so the court ruled.
Again,
No, I'm just saying, so this is where it's coming from. So, but I'm saying if it's a parental choice situation, which is what you refer to in your layout, then why not equally include in there the same language that it is not child abuse for a parent
Again,
to be
if
loving and
there's-
accepting of their child?
Again, if you're asking me a question, and which I'm not really sure of, the definition of abuse and neglect deal with mental abuse issues. Again, this is just to protect the parents so they don't lose their custody of their child if there's a disagreement over gender.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Hinojosa, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Representative Shaheen, we heard earlier in debate from members of the committee who said the allegations that were raised in committee were actually hiding real abuse that was occurring in those families. Isn't that correct?
I don't think that's what came out of the committee hearing.
Did it not come out in the committee that there was actual abuse happening in these families?
Are you referring to the witness testimony?
Absolutely.
I think the witness said there was an investigation. I thought they said they were found to be innocent of those charges.
Right, but the allegations were actual abuse. I don't know, and it sounds like
I've
you don't either,
I've
what
saw-
the
I've-
final outcome of those allegations were. But in this scenario, there were allegations of actual, real abuse that had nothing to do with gender identity. Isn't that correct?
I referred multiple cases to you where there were an issue with respect to gender identity.
But didn't
I
we
gave
just...
you multiple, in my bill layout, I gave multiple examples of where there was an issue in several states, including the state of Texas, where not agreeing with the child's gender was classified as abuse. I've also called out concern with respect to actions by legislatures of other states as well.
Yes, but you didn't cite specific cases. In the committee hearing, there were specific
In the
cases
committee, I
that were
said
cited.
in the committee, I said that there were issues across the nation and the state, and then I was asked for specifics, and I cited one.
And Representative Aisha Davis said, and she elucidated here on the floor,
There-
that
there-
the actual case you cited, there was actual abuse happening, and what you are asking this floor to do is to use gender identity as a shield for actual abuse. That is what has happened. That was the only example that came up in committee, is where a family used gender identity as a shield from actual awful abuse that was happening in the family.
That's inaccurate. There was accusations of abuse for gender.
Ms. Collier, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Representative, does this bill apply to children who are 17 years old?
Whatever the state definition of child is. So I think that's 17 and under.
Is it 18
think-
and under or 17?
I think
I'm
it's
not sure.
17.
I'm
I
asking.
think it's 17 and under.
Well, I mean,
That's,
do you contemplate
okay.
individuals who are 17 years old to be subject to this bill?
Under 18.
Oh, under 18. Anyone under 18. So whether you're 3 or 17, the same provisions apply.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're updating the definitions of abuse and neglect with respect to disagreements over perception of gender identity or sexual orientation.
So I'm trying to figure out how far this bill goes in terms of classification of abuse or neglect. In the point I'm trying to make, I guess it's kind of similar to what Representative Hinojosa was saying in terms of how far, so if the child is experiencing severe mental or behavioral health problems or challenges, at what point would that be considered abuse or neglect because
those
of the parents'
definition-
refusal to acknowledge their
So-
gender identity?
So those definitions are already covered under the current definitions of abuse and neglect, like mental abuse and what have you. Those are already covered. All we're saying is if there's a disagreement between the child and mom and dad, they don't lose their custody. We're just adjusting the definition.
Well, just to continue on that discussion, though, if the refusal of the parent causes severe mental health or behavioral challenges for that child, will there be an opportunity to classify that or to investigate abuse or neglect?
Again, mental abuse is already in the definition. So all we're doing here is we're protecting mom and dad if there's a disagreement with their child on gender identity. I'm sure you, along with me, disagreed with our folks on a bunch of different topics, and all we're doing here is we're making sure that mom and dad don't lose custody over their child over this topic.
So this does not impact what is considered, because it sounds like it does impact what's considered abuse or neglect.
No, those definitions are already in statute.
Okay. So if the child suffers because their parent refuses to acknowledge the gender that they identify with, that could still, and it causes severe mental health or some challenges for the child, that could still be investigated as neglect.
The current statute is very clear as far as the definition of abuse and neglect. Again, we're just updating the statute to ensure that it does not include a disagreement between gender identity or sexual orientation. There's plenty of provisions in current statute around abuse and neglect. If a child's being physically harmed, mentally harmed, the child's already protected, and that's already contemplated in state statute.
So is it fair to accept your response that this bill does not impact classification or investigations of abuse or neglect if the child suffers emotional or behavioral challenges because the parent refuses to accept or acknowledge their gender identity? Your bill does not touch that.
Mental health issues are already in statute.
I'm sorry, I
This
don't
literally-
understand.
This literally says abuse does not include the refusal by a person responsible for the child's care to affirm the child's perception of their gender identity and the expressed sexual orientation. So that's all this bill does. All the concerns around mental abuse, physical abuse, all those concepts are already covered in law,
But the concern
and they
that
remain the same.
Well, the concern I have is that a child could have emotional and behavioral challenges and distress because a parent refuses to acknowledge or does not acknowledge their gender identity, which could lead to issues. And so that could lead to neglect.
If a
and I
parent neglects their child, this is covered, that's already covered under statute.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
Mr. Manuel, for what
Will the
purpose?
gentleman yield for a few questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Appreciate it. We talked about this in committee, and I'm going to go at this back from the angle I had initially asked from. I know that this is to make sure that parents, if they're affirming or they're not affirming, are not losing their parent. And the biggest situation, like you were saying, is the fact of if one parent doesn't agree and the other parent does agree, that one parent won't lose their parental rights to have visitation with their son or daughter, regardless of what they're saying their pronouns are. But the question that I still have is, what protections in this bill are to make sure that this is not used as a tool for domestic violence during divorce
Domestic
proceedings?
violence is against the law already.
Domestic violence is against the law, but we do know that abusers use divorce proceedings to keep women trapped in a marriage by going through divorce proceedings.
That scenario is not relevant to this bill.
That scenario is relevant because if mom says, I affirm my child, dad says, I'm not going to affirm my child, this is not accurate, the mom goes to the court and says, I'm please asking my ex-husband or the husband that I'm trying to separate from to stop using certain pronouns or certain language because it's causing my child to feel less about themselves, harm, cut themselves, whether they're transgender, binary, their sexual orientation, because your bill affects all of it, all the way from, it's not just transgender, it's not just non-binary, it's also all the way to sexual orientation. So if mom affirms, dad doesn't affirm, they're going through a divorce, and mom says and asks the judge to limit visitation and have supervised visitation with someone from the court, how is that going to stop someone from something like that happening?
Well,
Because he doesn't know the answer.
would you repeat the question? I apologize.
How are we making sure that that issues like this are not going to be used in divorce proceedings? I'm going to give you an example of someone personally I know. The mother is affirming of the child's gender identity. The father is not. He thinks that it doesn't make sense. He also didn't want a divorce and has dragged out the divorce proceedings and dragged out custody hearings for more than 3 years because he said that that's his son. She says, that's my daughter. That's what she wants to be called. And so when the daughter has to go because she's under the age of 13 to go to visitation.
I think your scenario, I don't know if it applies to this bill or not.
You
right?
got to let
So
me
we're
finish
talk-
so that I can tell
Okay.
you what the scenario
Okay,
is.
go ahead. That's fair.
The mother is saying that it's abusive because her child hates herself when she goes to see her father because her father doesn't allow her to be herself. The father says, I'm never going to allow my son to be her, and I never wanted this doggone divorce in the first place. The father has done things like not pay child support until he was arrested and then pulled out cash and paid it, which is another way that abusers do use this. This is factual. And so what I'm saying is, how are we making sure that a child is not going to be used to keep a spouse in an abusive relationship with this language? Because currently, right now, you can do that right now.
Yeah,
Domestic
this-
violence, I'm going to end it here. Domestic violence is a tool that is used through the courts by either not paying child support or not showing up to certain court hearings. That does happen. So I'm saying, how are we making sure this is not going to be used to keep someone in a domestic violence marriage, which actually happens in real life.
Yeah. So this has to do with whether you're going to lose custody of your child or not. The scenario you're giving me has to do with, sounds like it's a divorce court proceeding, which this doesn't apply to.
It would apply to it if one.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I move for an extension of time, please.
There's a motion for an extension of time. Is there objection? There is objection. A record vote has been requested. All those in favor of extending the gentleman's time, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Strict enforcement has been requested. Members, please vote from your desks. You may not vote for any other member under strict enforcement. The clerk will ring the bell. There being 54 ayes and 63 nays, the gentleman's time is not extended.
Verification vote, please.
The following amendment, the clerk will